Let's talk about the Roman gladiator. On the one hand, they were these brutal killing machines. On the other hand, they were massive celebrities. Legally, they were the absolute lowest of the low, totally disgraced, but in the hearts and minds of the people, they were superstars. So, how did Roman society even deal with these two completely opposite identities? Well, that's the huge puzzle we're going to dive into. Take a look at this helmet. To the Roman elite, this thing was way more than just protection. This was the mask of infamia, the mask of shame. It was literally designed to cover the face of a man who was officially and legally worthless, a man stripped of every single right he had as a person. It was basically a giant sign that said, "This person is dishonored." Which, of course, leads to the big question, right? If this mask stood for total social ruin, how in the world did the guys forced to wear it become some of the biggest cultural heroes in the entire Roman Empire? It just doesn't seem to add up. And believe me, their pull was insanely powerful. The poet Juvenal wrote about this aristocratic woman, Epia, who literally ran off with a gladiator. He describes the fighter as this beat-up, scarred-up guy, but it didn't matter one bit. She chose him, and as Juvenal puts it, his sword over everything. Her kids, her reputation, her country, the whole 9 yards. This is the wild contradiction right at the heart of this story. Okay, so to really get this, we've got to start with the official side of things, the system that legally condemned these men. Let's break down what it really meant to wear the mask of infamia. So the key word you need to know here is infamia. Now, this wasn't just, a bad reputation. This was an actual formal legal status. If you were declared infamous, you lost the right to vote, to hold office, even to give testimony in court. You were basically seen as morally contaminated in the eyes of the law. And get this, gladiators weren't alone in this category. They were lumped in with some interesting company. Actors, pimps, prostitutes, basically anyone involved in what the Romans called the unspeakable professions. The logic was that all these people's bodies were for sale, whether for a show or for other services. But here's the crazy part. The same elites who looked down their noses at these people were obsessed with them. This quote from the poet Prudentius is just stunning. He describes a Vestal Virgin, one of the most holy figures in all of Rome, watching a gladiator kill another man in the arena. And what's her reaction? She says it is her delight. Can you believe that? It just perfectly captures the elite mindset. Public disgust, private fascination. Okay, but that's just one side of the coin, right? That's the official story. Now let's peel back that mask and find out what was really going on in the world the gladiators built for themselves. I mean, think about it. If the government itself says you're a nobody, what do? Do you just accept that? Or do you try to build something for yourself? What was the actual human reality of being a gladiator? And this is where you see the two worlds just collide. On one hand, you have Roman law, which basically said a gladiator was in a state of social death, cut off from having a family. But then you go and read an actual tombstone, like this one for a guy named Anastos. And who put it there? Not his owner, it was his wife and his son. See? To them, he wasn't socially dead. He was dad. He was their husband. And these families, they weren't just simple arrangements either. They were complex. Take the gladiator Urbicus. His tombstone tells us so much. He fought 13 bouts, died when he was just 22 years old, and left behind a baby girl, Olympias. And his epitaph actually includes a personal plea to his daughter's slave, Fortune, to take good care of her. This is a man planning for his daughter's future, even from the grave. The difference between what the elites wrote and what the people on the street thought, it was just staggering. You had some highbrow writer describing a gladiator as this grotesque, deformed creature. But then, what are people scratching into the walls of Pompeii? They're calling the gladiator Celadus, the one whom the girls sigh for. So yeah, not monsters. They were rock stars. They were heartthrobs. And you gotta remember, these guys were elite athletes. Just check out the record of this gladiator, Flamma. 34 fights, and he only lost 4 of them. He won 21 and got a reprieve, basically a draw, 9 times. That's not the track record of some disposable slave. That's the resume of a top-tier professional who knew his craft inside and out. So who paid for that awesome tombstone for Flamma? Not his boss. It was another gladiator, a man named Delicatus. And look at the specific word he used, co-armeo. It means comrade in arms. This tells you everything. This wasn't just a workplace. This was a brotherhood. They had their own code, their own sense of honor, and it had nothing to do with what the Roman state thought of them. So, When you put it all together, what do you get? You get a story of this quiet, but incredibly powerful kind of resistance. It's about staring right back at the system that's trying to erase you. And this is really the core idea, the big takeaway. We tend to think that honor is something that's handed down from the people in charge. But what the gladiators show us is that honor can also be built from the ground up. It can be claimed by the people at the very, very bottom. And that was their real victory. You know, the Roman state tried to slap this mask of shame on them, to tell the world they were worthless. But behind that mask, they were building something else entirely. They created their own worth based on family, on the bonds with their comrades, and on their pride as professionals in the arena. They built a world with its own rules. And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. The story of the gladiator isn't just some dusty piece of ancient history. It brings up a question that's just as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. When the most powerful forces in society tell you that you are worthless, what does it truly take to stare back at them and prove them wrong?